Here we have, over in this corner, a Villiers carburetor. It's an S25 3 carburetor, removed from a Pengor Penguin engine, a Villiers 9E engine. There was a video of partial disassembly of this engine on a previous video. Now we're going to take this carburetor apart to prepare it for proper cleaning. Now, also here we have an assortment of zippered bags, very handy to put small parts in so they can be kept track of. We have a wrench that we're going to need to take things like the bowl nut and the banjo fitting off, and a screwdriver, which we'll need for removing other items. And over here we have some of the parts we're going to be using. We have an assortment of gaskets and seals. We have a new float, and we have some other items that we're not going to be using on this carburetor, but parts that are still available for the carburetors. Here is a pair of the screws that go in the side here to index the throttle slide. This is a tickler button. We go there. We have also air filter clips, screws to hold the air filter clips on, and a air filter. Now again, we won't be using these parts today, so I'll just set them aside. And actually, we won't be using the float and the gasket set for this that will eventually be used on this carburetor. We're not going to use them today because this is going to require some fairly extensive cleaning. Okay, so to start disassembly, first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to take these clips off of here. They're excuse me, they're just going to get in the way as we clean this, so I'm just going to unscrew the two screws here. And a note: when working on something of this age, that parts are still accessible. We don't want to have to replace something because it was damaged during disassembly, when we could have avoided damage by using tools that fit the fasteners properly. The screw is almost loose enough to get out with my fingers. So what I mean is, this screwdriver bit fits the head of the screw and loosens it without slipping. It is so much easier to take something apart when the screwdriver or wrench you're using isn't slipping and damaging the fastener. Now, put those in there. We shouldn't lose them like that. Now, I'm also going to take the intake manifold off here. It's held by just a clamp. Just have to loosen the screw. Now, pardon me, we'll notice that the intake manifold has a slight angle to it. So when we set this back on the engine, especially when we install the intake manifold back in the carburetor, we'll set it back on this way, and we can set it loosely in position, and then we can adjust it. You see, I've moved it there now that the clamp's loose. So I'm just going to remove this from the carburetor, if it'll come out. The clamp is lots loose. Might be a little corrosion on this. There we go. It's pulling it. I'm just rotating it, pulling it out. There. So there's the intake manifold removed from the carburetor. Now I may, yeah, I'm going to remove the clamp too. I'm going to have someone else clean this carburetor, and the fewer parts there are on here that can accidentally be removed, or they may be in their way to clean it. Carefully pry this clamp off. There we go. I just opened it up a little bit here because there's a little bit of a flange here for it to go over. Now I'm going to put that screw back in it. Okay, now, so that's almost the bare carburetor. So the banjo fitting, this is the banjo fitting here, where the fuel line connects. Take it off, and on it we have, of course, here's the banjo fitting. This is the banjo bolt. We have two seals, which are fiber washers. I'm just going to leave them on that for now, and put the whole thing in a bag. Set it aside. And on this side of the carburetor, of course, here we had where the banjo fitting screwed in. That's corroded a bit. And on the other side we have the pilot screw, the tickler button, and the pin that indexes the throttle slide. You can see it in there. Not very well, but anyway. The end of this screw is just a pin with no threads on it that protrudes into the upper part of the carburetor to index the throttle slide. So I'm going to take this screw and spring out, but before I take it out I'm going to see what it's adjusted at. So before I unscrew it, I'm going to screw it in, but I'm going to keep track of how many turns in it takes, so that when I install it I can set it in the same position. So there's a half turn, there's another half turn, so that's one turn and a half, that's two turns, 2.5, almost 2 3/4. So I'm just going to remove that completely. Just unscrew it. Then I'm going to mark on the bag. Then I'm going to put it in. 2 3/4 turns. Now that might not be the final adjustment. It's not to say that this engine ran perfectly at that setting, but it will be a place to start. Okay, so now we're going to remove the float bowl. Float bowl was off of here before, so we'll remove the bowl nut. The bowl nut is dirty and it has a fiber washer on it. We're going to replace. The float bowl is rusty. Some rust in there, so that will definitely have to be cleaned. Put that in the bag. And here we have the float. This is a hollow, or was actually is a hollow brass float. It's just a hollow brass float in very poor condition. It was crushed, possibly by water in the bottom of the float bowl, and the gasket for the float bowl is loose, so I'm just going to remove that. We're going to replace it. So to take the float off, this is the main jet which we need to remove, and when we remove this jet and slide the float off the carburetor, the needle is here. We have to be careful we don't lose the needle. So I'm going to take our screwdriver, simply unscrew this main jet. Now the main tube here and the jet are brass, which is relatively soft, easily stripped and or broken. And the main jet here, see if we can see it here. We should, yeah, we can see through it, but it is corroded. It should be brass looking. So we'll want to clean that in the process of cleaning the carburetor. So I want to put that main jet in a bag. Very important we don't lose it. We're going to take the float off here. Now the float, it's hard to tell on this. It only goes on one way. It's held from rotating by the pilot tube here. So we can remove it. And actually, this was on backwards. Right here, on this float, it says bottom. So that should be on that way, since when that's installed, that's the bottom. So anyway, this float was on upside down, but it's not going to float very well. We do have a new float when we put this back together. So there's the inlet needle. You want to check it and make sure the end of it has no big ridges in it. It should be conical. We're going to put that in the bag here with our main jet so it doesn't get lost. And here we have the pilot tube. We're going to take that out. Again, it's brass. It has a slot in it here for a screwdriver. It should. There we go. It's going to unscrew. Now, oh, actually, you may be able to see. Trying to hold this up so we can see. Yeah, see through it. So this is not blocked, but again, it's corroded, so we want to clean that up before we reuse it. Oh, sorry. Yeah, it's pretty well corroded, so we want to clean that up before we reuse it. And we look at the bottom of, or the top, sorry, the bottom of the carburetor body. This is the top of the float chamber. This is pretty pitted, fairly well pitted. Now, we may be able to reuse this. A couple of things we have to watch for is this surface here on the outside is where the float bowl mates with it. There has to be enough of this surface left so that the float bowl will seal here, otherwise fuel will slop out of the float bowl and create a fire hazard. And we want to make sure that there are no passages. There are passages drilled here, that, like these passages here, they come through parts of the casting here, and if there are openings between there and here, the carburetor won't work right. So this carburetor may be reusable. We'll have to clean it and see. And also, see, there's a lot of corrosion where the needle sat. So if the needle doesn't sit in there and seal, when the float pushes the inlet needle up, it stops fuel from flooding the carburetor over. So if that needle doesn't seat properly, the carburetor will flood over and won't be very useful. Something we're going to do while we're here is we're going to remove the tickler button. This is the tickler button. There's a spring here that's corroded that we may replace too, but there's a screw that holds the spring in. So we simply remove the screw. Make sure the screwdriver's in place. There we go. As corroded as that is, it's coming out. So we'll take that screw out. It looks just like a sheet metal screw. And we're going to put that in a separate little bag here. So there's the screw for the tickler spring. the tickler spring should, careful not to break it, because the tickler, all that holds the tickler button in its sleeve here is the tickler spring. So I'm just going to work it out here carefully. There we go, it's coming. So there's the tickler spring. Put it with the screw. And the tickler button should simply, if it's not all corroded, and it is, I'm just going to get a little bit of something to squirt on there to lubricate it. Use a little bit of WD-40. Any light oil would probably work. I'm just going to work that and try not to force it. Spin it a little bit. See if there's a little bit of corrosion on there. Maybe, there we go. It's coming out. There we go. So there's the tickler button out. You can see the hole the spring went through. So we'll just put that in the bag here too. So there is our carburetor body, pretty well stripped. Now we could take this screw out. I don't think there's a need to. And we could also remove this main tube. I think I might do that. I'll speak to the guy that's I'm going to see if I can get this abrasive blasted and see what happens. Now, I'm going to talk to the guy, and if he thinks this is going to be in the way, I'll remove it. This is pressed in here. We can maybe see the top of it in here. That's the main tube. The needle, main metering needle, goes down inside that. The fuel goes up through that for the high-speed mixture, and no, probably can't see it in this light, unfortunately. But the main tube, the top of it is round with a flat spot, so it only goes in one way. Of course, this main jet has to be they want it in a particular position. So, just for reference, the main jet and the tickler button are on the same side. So, if we decide that this main tube is going to be in the way, what I'll do is I'll put this in a hydraulic press. I wouldn't recommend hitting it with a hammer. This, again, being brass, and I believe this is cast aluminum, all very soft, so we don't want to hit it with anything, but we could gently use a hydraulic press, or even if we had a vise that would open that wide, we could gently push that way with the vise to take it out. Now, if for some reason this is cleaned and there are holes through into the passages so that we cannot reuse this carburetor body, there are used carburetor bodies available on auction sites, and I actually a couple of years ago purchased a new carburetor body from the same place I purchased all the other spare parts from. So hopefully we can reuse this. Actually, you know what? I'm seeing now that we cannot reuse it. You can see that right here. This is corroded enough that you can see my finger through there. There are holes. There, you can see my finger goes behind it. So this is corroded right there, right through the top of the float chamber. So this carburetor body will not be reused. I suppose if we could not replace it, if we cleaned it up and that was the only hole in it, we could find a way to seal those holes. But we're going to have to, we'll try to replace this I'm sure we can find either a used body on an auction site or get a new body from the guys in England. We may be ordering more parts for this engine from them anyway. But anyway, that's the carburetor stripped. Hopefully very soon we'll have parts to reassemble it. Might be a little while before the engine is ready to run with it. But there's the carburetor strip.